In a quiet, forgotten corner of a small town, nestled at the very edge where civilization gives way to untamed wilderness, stood an old house. Its weathered facade and ivy-choked walls told a story of decades, perhaps even centuries, of solitude. It was to this very house that a young man, seeking refuge from the relentless pace of city life, decided to move. He was drawn to its rustic charm and the promise of a peaceful existence, a place where he could finally hear his own thoughts. The first few days were idyllic. The air was crisp, the silence was a soothing balm, and the house, despite its age, felt welcoming. He spent his time unpacking, painting, and slowly breathing life back into the dormant structure. Everything seemed perfect, a tranquil dream come true until the nights began to fall. It was then that the house revealed a different, more unsettling side of its character. Subtle at first, the sounds were easy to dismiss as the creaks and groans of an old building settling, but soon they became more distinct, more deliberate. A rhythmic thud, like footsteps pacing back and forth, began to emanate from the attic directly above his bedroom. This was followed by a low, scraping sound, a heavy, dragging noise that sent a shiver down his spine. The attic was the one part of the house he had avoided. A small square hatch in the ceiling of the upstairs hallway, sealed with a rusty latch, was its only entrance. He had told himself he would get to it eventually, that it was probably just full of old junk and dust. But a strange, unspoken dread kept him from even touching the latch. The sounds grew more persistent with each passing night, a nightly ritual performed by an unseen occupant. He tried to rationalize them: rats, a branch scraping against the roof, the wind playing tricks on the old timber. Yet deep down, he knew these explanations were thin, fragile shields against a growing fear that was taking root in his heart. The peaceful sanctuary he had sought was slowly transforming into a place of creeping anxiety. The nightly disturbances escalated, a crescendo of unseen activity that gnawed at his sanity. The footsteps became heavier, more urgent, no longer just pacing but stomping with a furious energy. The dragging sound was now accompanied by what sounded like the splintering of wood and the sharp clang of metal against the floorboards. Sleep became a luxury he could no longer afford, his nights spent wide awake, listening to the cacophony from above, his body rigid with tension. One particularly stormy night, as rain lashed against the windows and thunder cracked open the sky, the sounds from the attic reached a terrifying climax. It was a cacophony of chaos, a symphony of destruction that seemed to shake the very foundations of the house. The young man could bear it no longer. The mystery and the fear had become an unbearable weight. He had to know. He had to see what was up there. With a trembling hand, he grabbed a heavy-duty flashlight from his kitchen drawer, its beam cutting a nervous path through the dimly lit hallway. He pulled a rickety wooden ladder from a nearby closet and positioned it directly beneath the attic hatch. His heart pounded against his ribs, each beat a drum of impending doom. Taking a deep, ragged breath, he began to climb, the old wood groaning in protest under his weight. With a final hesitant push, he unhooked the rusty latch. The hatch creaked open with a sound like a final gasp, releasing a wave of musty, cold air that smelled of decay and forgotten time. He hoisted himself up, his feet landing softly on the dusty floorboards. He was in. The air was thick and heavy, making it difficult to breathe. The beam of his flashlight sliced through the oppressive darkness, a solitary beacon in a sea of black. It flickered nervously across the landscape of the attic, revealing a chaotic mess of discarded memories. Dust-caked furniture lay in disarray, their shapes like sleeping beasts under white shrouds. Cobwebs, thick as cotton, hung from the rafters like ghostly chandeliers. In the far corner, leaning precariously against the wall, was a large, ornate mirror. Its surface was clouded with years of grime, but it still held a faint, distorted reflection. As he swept the flashlight beam across the room, Something in the mirror caught his eye. A flicker of movement. He froze, his breath catching in his throat. He slowly panned the light back to the mirror. In its murky depths, he saw his own reflection, his face pale and wide-eyed. But behind him, just over his shoulder, a shape was coalescing. A tall, gaunt shadow, darker than the surrounding blackness, was moving with a fluid, unnatural grace. He spun around, his flashlight beam frantically cutting through the empty air behind him. There was nothing there, just dust shadows and the suffocating silence. He turned back to the mirror, his blood running cold. The shadow was gone. A sudden, chilling whisper slithered out from the absolute darkness, a sound that seemed to bypass his ears and coiled directly around his soul. It spoke his name, a dry, sibilant hiss that was both ancient and intimately familiar. Before he could even scream, the attic hatch slammed shut with the force of a thunderclap, plunging him into a terrifying, absolute blackness. The flashlight, knocked from his hand by the violent jolt, clattered to the floor and extinguished, its light snuffed out like a dying star. Panic, raw and primal, seized him. He scrambled blindly towards where he thought the hatch was, his hands clawing at the rough floorboards. As his fingers brushed against the solid wood of the sealed exit, a new sound began. A wet, tearing noise coming from all around him. From the infinitesimal cracks in the old wooden walls, from the seams in the floorboards, from the very joints of the house's frame, something was emerging. In the suffocating darkness, he could feel more than see them. Pitch-black claws, long and razor-sharp, began to extrude from the structure of the attic. They moved with a horrifying, insect-like skittering, their tips scratching against the wood. They were everywhere, a forest of obsidian talons growing from the shadows. They snagged at his clothes, their cold, sharp points grazing his skin. He cried out, a strangled sob of pure terror, as they began to wrap around his limbs, their grip impossibly strong. The claws were not just grabbing him, they were pulling him, dragging him away from the hatch, deeper into the heart of the attic's darkness. He fought, he kicked, he screamed until his throat was raw, but it was like struggling against the tide. He was being pulled into the very walls, into the shadows themselves, his body being absorbed by the ancient, malevolent entity that dwelled within. His final desperate scream was muffled as the darkness consumed him entirely. By the time the first rays of morning light streamed through the windows of the old house, the attic was once again silent. It was empty, the dust on the floor undisturbed, as if no one had set foot in there for 100 years. Downstairs, the house was just as it had been, a peaceful, empty shell, as if no young man had ever dreamed of a new life within its walls. Everything was as it was, with one small, chilling exception. In the grimy old mirror leaning against the far wall of the now silent attic, a new image was captured. Trapped behind the glass, a face could still be seen, its features contorted in a silent, unending scream, the terrified eyes of the young man, staring out from the other side, a permanent resident of the demon's domain.